Hey guys, so I wanted to share a high-rated Marincess deck profile with you, and this deck list belongs to, I'm just gonna call him 09 because his username is very long, and so he's always rated very high with this deck, which is insane considering the format that we're in, and so usually I do interview these high-ranked DB players, but because English is not his first language, he much preferred that I convey the message on his behalf, and so I wrote questions to him and he wrote it back, and so thank you very much for doing that. I will try my best to deliver your message, and so unfortunately for you guys, you are stuck with me for the rest of the video. So let's just get right to the deck list. And so we're going to start off with the one Sleepy Maiden. Basically, this provides a card destruction protection effect, I guess, for your Marincess card, and you can special it. The 2 Pascalis, which allows you to special Marincess body if you summon this one. The 3 Spring Roll, which is kind of interesting. So it's another way to special another body out, but it does have that milling effect and also being able to burn based on the Marincess cards. But it's something that could potentially trigger something like a Kelbeck and mill even further, and we'll get to a little bit more into the Shizu cards. We also have the 3 Blue Tangs. So this one is sort of like the key one. Foolish is on the summon. When it's sent to grave as link material for the water monster, you can also excavate 3 cards and add a Marincess card. And this is kind of why when this archetype first got released back in like 2019, it was compared and called Water Salads because it was kind of like Foxy. And Salamangreat was, of course, very popular during that time. We also have the double Seahorse and the Mandarin, which I think are just ways to just provide extra bodies. And then also the one Basilemia. I believe the last time I did a profile with him a couple months ago, he mentioned that this is primarily just to be able to turbo out that Abyss Dweller, for example. And so onto the spells, we do have the 2 Pot of Desires. He is playing 2 Marincess Battle Lotion. I did ask him what are some of the changes he made to his list now that Ishizu Tearlaments are a thing, because the last time I talked with him, this was before all that came out. And so he did mention adding Marincess Battle Lotion as one of the changes he made, as well as the Marincess Dive. So this field spell, so the whole effect with, being able to be unaffected if Crystal Hearts uses material, that gimmick is not really used anymore. Back when this archetype first came out, that was kind of its thing, which of course, it's not that great. So luckily they got a lot more support since then, and this field spell does give a lot of attack boost, but it can also just equip up to 3 Marincess monsters to your Marincess Link monster in the Action Monster Zone. And so I guess I'm obviously not an expert in Marincess, so those of you playing the deck, feel free to let me know in the comments how an additional copy of this can kind of help play through Ishizu cards. I guess maybe it forces out the Ishizu shufflers as you try to equip those rather to the Link monster. The Marincess Dive, the better effect is if you have the field spell, then you can actually special Marincess monster from the deck, but otherwise you can also special that non-link Marincess monster in the grave. We do have the 2 Talents and the 2 Forbidden Droplets, good going first and second. Power spells, can't really complain much about that. We do have the Adventure Package still. I did ask him about this, and so he said that in the pure Marincess build, it's surprisingly, its plan gets kind of foiled by like a single Kelbeck bounce, from what I'm told, and so Adventure Tokens kind of nice. Playthrough Havness, for example, is some of the things that he mentioned. Just being able to bait out those hand traps and can be pretty good going second as well with the Draco back. We do have the Grave Shufflers and the Shizu, the Keldo and Medora, which is cool to see. Obviously, aside from being able to combat against your opponent's Tearlament fusion plays, he did mention that it's kind of nice being able to shuffle back your Marincess monsters, or rather just your extra deck monsters, and also potentially being able to summon Toad twice in that game. The Kelbeck is kind of interesting in terms of, aside from the fact that it can be used as a hand trap to bounce, the mills, he did mention that, it's actually kind of nice because you have Blue Slug that can add that Marincess monster in grave to hand, or the Coral Anemone that can special from the grave, as well as the Marble Rock that can just add any Marincess card in the grave. So being able to mill your own or being milled by your opponents like Kelbeck or Guido can actually be beneficial to you as well. So that's kind of cool. And then lastly, the trap is the Marincess Wave. This trap is pretty nuts. It can negate like your opponent's monster, but if you have like a Link 2 or higher Marincess monster, then like your cards are now unaffected for the rest of the turn. And if you have a Link 3 or higher Marincess monster, you can just play this from your hand. So it's kind of reminiscent of Harpy's Featherstorm in Harpy's decks, where they can actually play this from hand, or play that card rather. And so it's kind of cool to see rogue decks having these like really strong traps. Onto the extra deck, we do have the 2 Sea Angel, which can allow you to add that Marincess spell from deck to hand. We already talked about the double Blue Slugs, the 2 Coral Anemone, the last time I did a profile with this deck. I did mention that it's kind of cool because this card's also seen in like other water decks, let's say like Mermail, which admittedly does not see much play anymore at all, but you can like use that to like bring back Nephthys, for example. The Marbled Rock, we talked about being able to add from the grave and the whole milling and synergy with that. But it's just a big body with like the equips, and also it has like battle protection. So when this archetype first came out, this was like your only boss monster, which as you can tell, wasn't that good back then. So luckily they got more support in, for example, in Argonaut, which is kind of nice because it can like bounce back cards, but also it's a quick effect spell trap negate, which is always nice to have. And then another new boss monster that they received was this Bubble Reef, which is kind of like Water Heat Soul because you can like draw on your opponents and your turn, and also it can special summon like Marincess bodies, which is kind of cool. The Tearlaments, this is something that we mentioned in the last profile, and by now most of you probably know this interaction where, because when you clear the board with Tearlaments, you're the one special summoning your opponent's monsters to your opponent's field, right? And because a lot of times you're locked into like the Marincess effects where you're locked into water effect, or especially in water monsters, your opponent actually will not get their monsters back if they're not water, which is like a really cool interaction. And definitely I think this deck utilizes this card the best at this moment. I know Draco Slayers also play this card, but I don't think it's nearly as useful in that deck than it is in Marincess. Area is kind of cool while we no longer have as much Spright representation as the last time I did this profile with them, where you can like summon your opponent's Toad. I mean, you can still do that. You're just not seeing as much Spright, but you are seeing a lot of Tearlaments, and you know what? Recalus is water, and so that's a big body to take and probably leads to easy OTKs. We do have the Coral Triangle, and so that can actually add your trap. Does have a special summoning effect as well. And then of course your Dweller, the Bahamut Shark for that Toad. I did mention, I asked him, you know, what do you do when you get Dimension Shifter? Because in this current format, when you play a deck that's rogue, you have to ask yourself, you know, what strategy does it have to be able to combat against Tearlaments, right? And most of the time it defaults into a deck that can make a Beast Dweller or being able to play Shifter. And so on that note, you also have to consider, okay, you have a strategy against Tearlaments, but now there's so many other decks trying to combat Tearlaments where they're playing Dimension Shifter. How well can you play under Shifter, right? And so I asked him, and he actually said, unfortunately, it's kind of like just adventure token stuff pass. He did say he really wanted to play Baguska. He just doesn't have the room. So if you do have the room in your list, if you're playing this deck, maybe Baguska is something to consider. And then lastly, onto the side, pretty standard, generic, very powerful spells. 3 Dark Ruler, the 1 Feather Duster, and the 3 Lightning Storms, as well as the 3 Bells. I guess, you know, it stops your opponent's Tearlament fusion plays, but can also kind of prevent like the Grave Shufflers from going off and interrupting you. The 3 Drolls, you know, this is actually pretty sneaky good right now. So obviously from a YCS Top Cut representation in terms of their deck list, not that much Droll as you would see if you watch my analytical breakdown videos, but it's still really good. Like for example, like against Thunder, it's great unless they have Shifter, but against rogue decks, usually this card is really nuts, and just, yeah, it's pretty strong, and certainly if you play it in your side, I don't think anyone can really complain about that. And then the double Fenrir, I believe he main decked this actually the last time I did a profile with him. Really strong card, good going first and second, and also I believe one of the things that Ian mentioned back then was that it just allows for easy OTK as well. Just having a beefy body at 2400 as well as your adventure token stuff just puts a lot of bodies on board. So that's it for the deck profile. So obviously, I'm not an expert in Marincess. Hopefully, I was able to convey his messages. And so, yeah, I will also have some replays that he shared with me, clipped at the end of this video. So you can certainly watch that to learn how to play this deck. And so, yeah, thanks for watching. And thank you again for 09 for sharing this list. And take care, everyone.